There are moments in a man's life when the pillars of reason begin to tremble. When the outer world loses its luster and the only light left comes from within. But it is not a comforting light. It is an ancestral fire. Red primordial. In 1913, Carl Gustav Jung, Swiss psychiatrist, disciple of Freud and one of the greatest names in modern psychology, broke away from everything that made him respectable. He abandoned science like a castaway leaves dry land. Not out of madness, but out of fidelity to something deeper. The soul itself. For years, he plunged into a state of controlled delirium. It wasn't schizophrenia. It was a voluntary journey into the unconscious. A descent guided by symbols, archetypes, and voices from beyond the mind. He called this process active imagination. And the result? A book he hid from the world until after his death. A heavy tome bound in red leather. Handwritten in hand, illustrated like an alchemical grimoire. Inside it there is no theory. Only revelation. The Red Book is not a work about psychology. It is an initiation. It is the gospel according to the soul. Carl Gustav Jung, the respected Swiss psychiatrist, was at the peak of his career. Director of the Borg Holtzley Clinic. Freud's protégé. A renowned lecturer. Science celebrated him. Society listened to him. His ego was well dressed. But something began to creak beneath the surface. In his dreams, strange images appeared: a Red Sea rising, covering cities, blood running through silent streets, towers falling, deaths without names. Reason wavered. He took notes, observed, waited for it to pass. It didn't. The year was 1913. Europe didn't know it yet, but it was about to plunge into World War I. Jung knew not with his intellect, but with his body, with his spirit. He saw it before anyone else. But that vision came at a high price. It was like being dragged to the bottom of the sea by an invisible god. He would later write in his journal, his break with Freud wasn't just intellectual. It was symbolic. Jung was literally shattering the old mechanistic view of the psyche. He no longer wanted to treat the soul as a problem to be solved. He wanted to listen to it, to follow it, to be guided by it. And then came the darkness. An internal darkness. Not ordinary sadness, but the dark night of the soul. A phrase borrowed from St. John of the Cross. Yet it gains new substance here. It wasn't depression. It was dissolution. A collapse of the self. A necessary inner shipwreck so that something deeper could emerge. It was during this phase that Jung discovered the practice that would change his life. Active imagination. A method between dreaming and meditation, where he allowed images to arise spontaneously and consciously interacted with them. A conscious delirium, a voluntary hallucination, or as the ancient mystics would say, an invocation of the soul. For hours he sat in his study and wrote what he saw. He didn't invent, he recorded, like a prophet, like a scribe of another reality. The pen raced across pages as characters emerged from the unconscious and spoke to him. Not generic symbols, real entities. Elijah, the Old Testament prophet, Shalom, the biblical dancer, a serpent god, a laughing demon, a golden child, a bodiless voice. Everything was documented and eventually illustrated. These visions shook him. He questioned his sanity. But something deep within told him he was being guided. That this was necessary. That it wasn't illness, but initiation. Whoever descends into hell returns with fire in their eyes. At that moment, the man Carl Jung dies. And the initiate is born. The seeker. The alchemist of the soul. He leaves the comforts of academia behind and dives into what the ancients called the opus magnum. The great inner work. No certainties. No glory. No map. Only a blank notebook and the courage to get lost in order to find something greater. During this period, he wrote, "My life is the story of the self-realization of the unconscious." The Red Book begins to take form in this void. Each page a ritual. Each drawing a vision. Each word an offering. It's no exaggeration to say Jung underwent a true shamanic process. The same pattern seen in mystics and saints. The breakdown of the ordinary personality so that higher consciousness may emerge. Perhaps that's why he never wanted to publish the Red Book during his lifetime. He knew the world wouldn't understand. How could a rationalist audience accept that the greatest leap in his career was getting lost? But the initiate understands. The initiate knows that before the light there is night and that true wisdom is not conquered. It is suffered. That the cries of the unconscious are in fact sacred chants for those who have ears to hear. Throughout his journey into the unconscious, Carl Jung did not encounter only random symbols or disconnected images. Amid the visionary chaos that overwhelmed him daily, a central figure emerged, a consistent presence that stood out among all the others. This entity was Philemon, and his appearance marks a radical shift in Jung's inner process. From then on, his psychological investigation became a true spiritual dialogue. Philemon was not a consciously created character nor a figure borrowed from classical mythology. Jung first met him in a vision during active imagination. His method for inducing visionary states without losing lucidity in this vision. An old man in a blue robe with kingfisher wings and a long white beard appeared and began to speak to him. Not as a hallucination, but as an autonomous entity. Understanding the context is important. Jung had been deeply immersed in the study of myths, comparative religions, alchemical symbols, and Eastern spiritual practices. His aim was to find a language that could encompass the vastness of the human psyche, and then instead of a concept, a presence appeared, someone he could talk to, question, and most of all learn from. Philemon represented what Jung would later describe as the archetype of the wise old man present in myths, fairy tales, and spiritual traditions across the world. In Taoism, he resembles the inner Lao. In early Christian mysticism, the divine logos in the Kabbalah, the hidden elder of the tree of life. He is the symbol of transcendental intelligence that guides the individual toward wholeness. Jung understood that Philemon was not a real being in the physical sense. But neither was he an invention. He called him an autonomous psychic reality. A living force within the psyche that behaves like an independent person with thoughts, intentions, and even wisdom that did not belong to the ego. Philemon seemed to me like a real spirit. He conveyed thoughts to me I had never had before. I knew I was dealing with something that was part of me. But at the same time, far beyond me. Carl Jung. Philemon was more than a symbolic counselor. He became a key guide in the process Jung described as individuation. The path by which a human being becomes aware of their total psychic self, integrating not only persona and ego but also the shadow, thema animus, and ultimately the self. And this is where Philemon's role becomes clear. He is the mediator between the ego and the self, an inner guide assisting in the transition from chaos to inner order, from fragmentation to unity. This kind of guide appears in many esoteric traditions. In Hermeticism, for instance, Hermes Trismegist plays precisely that role, the one who reveals to the initiate the secrets of the hidden reality of the macrocosm and microcosm. In alchemy, it is Mercury, the universal spirit that unites opposites and enables the great work. In Jungian psychology, Philemon takes on this same role, but without being tied to any fixed system. He is a living symbol of the wisdom that emerges when the rational mind goes silent. Jung even began writing letters to Philemon as if exchanging correspondence with an invisible intelligence. He was strict with himself. He refused to accept any experience that could not withstand the test of inner honesty. He could distinguish imagination from unconscious projection. But with Philemon, he admitted there was something beyond rational understanding and other lived within his psyche. More than that, Philemon brought truths that would form the foundation of much of Jungian psychology. Many of the core ideas that later appeared in his works, the collective unconscious archetypes, the transcendent function, synchronicity, began to take shape during these conversations with Philemon. Not by chance, Jung called the Red Book the raw material from which all else emerged. During the 7 years he recorded his experiences in the Liberovas, Jung drew Philemon several times. His visual depictions show a being with a penetrating gaze surrounded by symbols like the fish, the serpent, and the six-pointed star, all esoteric elements associated with spiritual transformation. This shows that Philemon was not a static figure, but a dynamic evolving symbol that Jung gradually internalized. Philemon also played an ethical role. Jung recounts that on many occasions this inner figure reprimanded him when his mind began to inflate. When the ego tried to claim insights as personal revelations, Philemon brought him back to center. He reminded him that true wisdom does not seek power or recognition, but integration and truth. The danger is not in the shadow. The danger is in the man who believes he is only light. One of Philemon's lessons, and this may be one of the greatest lessons of this chapter. In an era where so many seek external guides, gurus, leaders, systems, saviors, Jung shows us through Philemon that the most powerful guide already dwells within us. But to access it, one must silence the ego, cross the shadow, and let the unconscious speak. Philemon is not exclusive to Jung. Each of us, when diving into our own psyche with courage, may encounter a similar voice, perhaps with a different name, form, or language, but with the same function, to remind us who we truly are beyond the roles we wear. That's the central point. The encounter with Philemon is not a fantasy, but an archetypal stage in the spiritual journey. Jung simply had the boldness to record it with radical honesty and offer us a model. The Red Book is therefore not merely the journal of a man who spoke with a wise old man. It is the map of a psychological and spiritual process that is available to anyone who dares to listen to silence and embrace the strange to an outsider. Carl Jung's passage through the realms of the unconscious might seem like a spiritual journey. And indeed, it is, but not in the illuminated solar sense. Filled with comfort and elevated insights. True spirituality, Jung would discover, begins with the soul's putrefaction, with dissent, with the symbolic death of the ego, and this is where one of the most important and most misunderstood concepts of Jungian psychology emerges. The shadow. For Jung, the shadow is everything the ego refuses to see in itself. It contains repressed desires, aggressive impulses, forbidden fantasies, fears, shame, instincts, traumas, but also paradoxically, it guards treasures, forgotten potential, buried courage, neglected strengths. Integrating the shadow does not mean destroying inner evil. It means accepting what was exiled. And this is exactly what Jung lived through. During the years he wrote the Red Book, he not only saw the shadow, he dialogued with it, he confronted demonic figures, he plunged into archetypes of destruction, into scenes of death, cannibalism, madness, and the dissolution of the self. Some of his descriptions resemble shamanic visions or purging experiences during enthologenic rituals. Yet everything happened in waking consciousness using only active imagination. This was the price to see everything that had been repressed not only as a man but as a civilization. What Jung faced was not just his personal shadow. It was the hidden side of humanity. Everything that we do not face in ourselves will be presented to us as fate. He said he recorded dialogues with inner shadow figures. One, for example, tries to seduce him with promises of absolute power. Another drags him into a desert where everything dies. At one point, he encounters the devil himself, a sarcastic figure with empty eyes. What do these figures want? That he surrenders? That he accepts he is just another human full of contradictions and desires? That he abandons the idea of purity? That he stops running? This is the key point of baptism in the abyss. The ego must die. Modern culture and even much of contemporary spirituality taught us to seek the good side of the inner life. Healing, peace, light. But for Jung, any attempt at enlightenment that ignores the shadow is a lie. Like the alchemists, he understood that the first stage of the great work is nigredo, the black night of the soul, decomposition, symbolic death. As he said, individuation begins with a wound. The wound in his case was twofold. The loss of social identity. He was no longer the celebrated doctor of Switzerland, and inner dissolution. The rational ego with its controls and certainties gradually disintegrated. He wrote compulsively, painted chaotic images, wept, sat in silence for hours. It was as if he were being initiated by a force that does not forgive inner lies. But there was method. Jung did not give in to delirium. He took notes, observed, classified, compared with ancient myths, with the Gnostic texts he studied, with medieval alchemy, with symbols from the Upanishads and dreams of his own patients. He realized what he was going through was not just personal. It was archetypal, part of a universal journey that appears in myths across the world. The descent into the underworld. This descent has many names. The Greeks called it katabasis. The alchemists called it putrefactio. In the tarot, it is Arcana 13, death. This stage offers no answers, it offers ruin. Destruction of the false pillars of the self. Jung saw himself collapse stone by stone. The man who once controlled the psyche was now a pilgrim without ground. He began to understand that it is not about defeating the shadow but about dialoguing with it. Listening to it, acknowledging its existence. More than that, he began to notice that the more he faced the darkness, the more consciousness emerged. It is in chaos that the new center is born. The shadow then ceases to be an enemy and reveals itself as a mirror. A guide, a necessary aspect of wholeness. And it is in this process that Jung approached something that had until then only been a philosophical idea. The self, the center of the total psyche. Integrating conscious and unconscious, light and darkness, persona and essence. The self is not a rational goal. It is an experience that only becomes accessible once one crosses the abyss. When one is reduced to dust and something new emerges. This rebirth is not immediate. It is gradual. It comes as clarity after the storm, as a light that does not blind but reveals. Jung began to perceive patterns. He began to draw mandalas. He began to feel that there was order behind the chaos. That the soul had its own rhythm. And that the shadow, far from being a mistake, was part of the path. That is why years later he would say in one of his most powerful phrases, "Salvation is in the mud. The pearl is born in the sludge." Jung shows us that it is not about healing the soul, but about accepting its contradictory nature. About making peace with what is ugly, dark, rejected, and from that building something real. Carl Jung finished writing the Red Book around 1930. Not because his journey had ended, but because he had understood something essential. The book was not the end. It was the portal. He had undergone the collapse of the ego, dialogued with the voices of the unconscious, found the inner master, and traversed the chaos of the shadow. From this passage he emerged not with absolute answers but with a new way of seeing reality as living symbol. Jung had essentially completed a full initiatory journey, and the Red Book is the journal of that initiation. Jung never published the book. For decades it remained locked away by his family. A manuscript of nearly 200 pages on thick parchment with careful calligraphy and intense symbolic, sometimes disturbing illustrations. Jung himself said the work was not for everyone. He knew what it contained. Not a psychological treatise, but a gospel of the soul. Not in the traditional religious sense, but in the sense of a revealed teaching. A testimony about the hidden laws that govern the human psyche and about the path that leads to wholeness. The format of the book, its symbols, its texts and images bring it closer to a medieval grimoire than to an academic text. This is no accident. Jung had deep knowledge of the alchemical tradition of European esoteric literature and of Hermetic manuscripts. The Liber Novus, the Latin name he gave the book, follows a ritualistic logic. It is divided into 3 parts: the way of what is to come, the soul, and the 7 sermons to the dead. Each section is a stage of the soul's journey, echoing ancient spiritual maps from Kabbalah, Orphic mysteries, and Egyptian initiations. The images are mandalas, representations of the self, of the psyche and order. There are serpents, labyrinths, gods, eyes, solar crosses, winged creatures, elements that belong to the collective imagery of humanity. What Jung would call archetypes. Primordial symbolic forms that inhabit the minds of all peoples in all times. On many pages, Jung writes like a prophet. At other times, like an alchemical initiate, he speaks to the soul as if standing before a real being. Not a metaphor. The tone is solemn, demanding, and perhaps that is why the Red Book is so impactful for those who approach it without academic expectations. It is not a book to be understood. It is a book to be lived. Jung said, "This book freed me from all my neurosis. I wrote it with blood." After writing the Red Book, Jung dedicated the following decades to developing conceptual frameworks for what he had experienced. His symbolic psychology, his theories of archetypes, individuation, the collective unconscious, and the transcendent function, all of it grew from the fertile soil of this visionary experience. But to express what he had lived, he turned to the language of alchemy. Jung delved deeply into medieval and Renaissance alchemical texts. Works like the Rosarium Philosophorum, Aurora Consurgens, and the writings of Paracelsus and Zosimos of Panopolis were studied with the eye of a psychologist and also of an initiate. He understood that alchemy was not a protochemistry of the Middle Ages, but a symbolic science. The alchemists were not merely trying to transmute metals. Jung merely deciphered the esoteric language and adapted it to modern psychology. The result was one of the greatest bridges ever built between science and mysticism. "Alchemy is the historical background of my psychology," he said. One of the most enigmatic passages in the Red Book is the so-called 7 Sermons to the Dead. Written by Jung in 1916 and attributed not to himself but to Basilides, a Gnostic mystic of the 2nd century. In this text, Jung channels a voice that speaks of paroma, the divine fullness, of arouse, the God who unites good and evil, of dualities and transcendences. The sermons are not rational. They are symbolic. They blend Gnostic cosmology, existential ethics, and the metaphysics of the unconscious. It is an occult scripture as if Jung at that moment were no longer the author, but the instrument. This section echoes the tradition of divine logos, of ancient oracles, of mystical revelations that transcend intellect. It is here that the Red Book fully reveals itself as an initiatory text. The Red Book remained unpublished for nearly 80 years. It was only in 2009 that Jung's family allowed its full publication. Since then, the work has been studied not only by psychologists but by mystics, artists, philosophers, theologians, and seekers from all over the world. It has been compared to the Divine Comedy, the Zohar, the Bhagavad Gita, and Plato's Dialogues. But unlike those works, the Red Book is viscerally personal. It does not claim to be a manual. It is not a doctrine. It is the raw portrait of the process of becoming whole. Perhaps its greatest value lies here, showing that it is possible to dialogue with the unconscious without being devoured by it. That there is method in the plunge. That there is a map within the abyss. For many today who immerse themselves in the Red Book, the impact does not lie in its erudition, but in its reflection. It activates something, it resonates. Reading the Red Book is for many a confrontation with their own soul. With the voice that never truly went silent, only ignored, it reminds the reader that within them dwells a forest, a temple, a chaos, a God, and as Jung taught, the soul exists and it wants something from you. If the Red Book is a gospel, it does not promise salvation. It promises a journey. And if you, like Jung, have the courage to enter the darkness without a map, you may also find somewhere along the way your own Phylon, your own self, and your true face. If you've made it this far, perhaps you understand. The Red Book is not just about Jung. It's about you, it's about us. About that unnameable thing we call the soul. And that keeps calling to us even when the entire world screams for silence. This video is not an explanation. It is an invitation. And the invitation is this. Close your eyes. Listen. Thank you for watching. With the pillars of his rational world crumbling, Carl Jung embarked on a daring experiment, a voluntary descent into the unconscious. He called this method active imagination, a practice bridging meditation and dreaming, where he allowed images to rise spontaneously from the depths of his psyche and engaged with them consciously. This was no reckless plunge into madness but a disciplined journey, a controlled delirium guided by symbols, archetypes, and voices beyond the mind. In his study, pen in hand, Jung became both explorer and scribe, documenting visions that shook the foundations of his being. Through active imagination, Jung encountered a cast of inner figures, each vivid and autonomous. There was Elijah, the Old Testament prophet, Salome, the biblical dancer, a serpent god, a laughing demon, a golden child, and a bodiless voice. These were not mere symbols but psychic realities, entities with their own agency, speaking truths Jung had never conceived. He did not invent them, he recorded their words, their presence, as if transcribing a dialogue with another realm. For hours, he sat in silence, letting the pen race across pages, capturing scenes of cosmic battles, desolate deserts, and radiant mandalas. His illustrations, serpents, labyrinths, winged beings, echoed the iconography of ancient myths and alchemical texts. This process was both exhilarating and terrifying. Jung questioned his sanity, yet an inner conviction assured him this was no illness but an initiation. He was not losing himself, he was finding something greater. The visions were not random, they carried the weight of archetypes, primordial patterns shared by all humanity. Jung recognized parallels in the myths, Gnostic texts, and alchemical manuscripts he studied. His descent was a modern echo of the hero's journey, the katabasis of Greek mythology, where one ventures into the underworld to return transformed. The result of this inner odyssey was the Red Book, a tome bound in red leather, handwritten in hand, illustrated like a medieval grimoire. It was not a psychological treatise but a ritual, each page a testament to Jung's fidelity to the soul. The Red Book was not meant to explain the psyche but to embody its mysteries. Through active imagination, Jung had opened a portal to the unconscious, proving that the soul speaks, if one has the courage to listen. Amid the visionary chaos of his descent, Carl Jung encountered a figure who would transform his journey, Philemon. A wise old man with a white beard, clad in a blue robe, and adorned with kingfisher wings. Philemon emerged during a session of active imagination, not as a creation of Jung's mind but as an autonomous presence. A psychic reality with thoughts and wisdom beyond Jung's own. This encounter marked a shift from psychological exploration to a profound spiritual dialogue. As Philemon became Jung's inner guide, illuminating the path to wholeness. Philemon embodied the archetype of the wise old man, a universal symbol found in myths and spiritual traditions worldwide, akin to Laozi in Taoism, the Logos in Christian mysticism, or Hermes in Hermeticism. He was not a mere metaphor but a living force within Jung's psyche, offering insights that challenged and expanded his understanding. Jung described Philemon as conveying thoughts I had never had before, a presence both part of him and far beyond him. In their dialogues, recorded meticulously in the Red Book, Philemon served as a mediator between Jung's ego and the deeper self, guiding him through the labyrinth of the unconscious toward integration. Jung's relationship with Philemon was dynamic and reverent. He wrote letters to him, questioned him, and even painted him, depicting a figure with a piercing gaze surrounded by symbols like serpents and six-pointed stars. Philemon was not always gentle. He reprimanded Jung when his ego inflated, reminding him that true wisdom seeks neither power nor recognition but truth and balance. The danger is not in the shadow, Philemon taught, but in the man who believes he is only light. This lesson grounded Jung, keeping him honest in his quest. Philemon's influence extended beyond Jung's personal journey. He inspired core concepts of Jungian psychology, including the collective unconscious, archetypes, and the process of individuation, the path to becoming whole by integrating all aspects of the psyche. Philemon was Jung's proof that the greatest guide lies within, accessible to anyone willing to silence the ego and listen to the soul's voice. In the Red Book, Philemon is not just Jung's companion but a universal archetype, inviting each of us to seek our own inner sage on the road to self-discovery. In the depths of his inner journey, Carl Jung confronted a force both terrifying and essential, the shadow. The hidden side of the psyche encompassing repressed desires, fears, aggressive impulses, and forgotten potential. Far from a mere psychological concept, the shadow was a living reality for Jung, manifesting in the Red Book as demonic figures, scenes of destruction, and archetypes of chaos. Through active imagination, he dialogued with these dark entities, a sarcastic devil, a seductive spirit promising power, a guide dragging him into a lifeless desert. These encounters were not battles to be won but invitations to listen, to understand, to integrate. Jung understood the shadow as everything the ego denies, the shameful, the forbidden, the rejected. Yet, paradoxically, it also holds treasures, buried courage, untapped creativity, suppressed strength. Integrating the shadow did not mean eradicating evil but accepting what had been exiled. In the Red Book, Jung faced not only his personal shadow but the collective shadow of humanity. The unacknowledged darkness of a civilization hurtling toward war. His visions of blood, death, and dissolution mirrored the repressed instincts of an era, warning that what we do not face in ourselves will be presented as fate. This confrontation was Jung's nigredo, the alchemical stage of decomposition, akin to the mythic descent into the underworld. His ego, once fortified by academic prestige, crumbled stone by stone. He wept, painted chaotic images, and sat in silence, initiated by a force that tolerated no inner lies. Yet there was method in this dissolution. Jung meticulously recorded his dialogues, comparing them to Gnostic texts, alchemical symbols, and myths. He recognized his ordeal as archetypal, a universal catabasis where the false self must die for the true self to emerge. The shadow, Jung discovered, was not an enemy but a mirror, a guide to wholeness. By facing it, he unlocked new consciousness, glimpsing the self, the center of the psyche uniting light and dark. His mandalas, drawn in this period, reflected an emerging order within chaos. Salvation is in the mud, Jung later wrote, revealing that the soul's beauty lies in its contradictions. In embracing the shadow, he showed that true growth begins not with light but with the courage to dwell in darkness. From the crucible of his inner descent, Carl Jung forged the Red Book, a monumental work that transcends psychology to become a spiritual testament. Bound in red leather, its nearly 200 pages of handwritten text and vivid illustrations resemble a medieval grimoire, pulsing with the energy of ancient alchemical manuscripts. Completed around 1930, the Red Book is not a scholarly treatise but an initiatory ritual. A gospel according to the soul. Each page, adorned with mandalas, serpents, and cosmic symbols, is a sacred offering, a record of Jung's dialogue with the unconscious. The book, titled Liber Novus, Latin for New Book, is structured in 3 parts: the way of what is to come, the soul, and the 7 sermons to the dead. Each section maps a stage of Jung's inner journey, echoing esoteric traditions like the Kabbalah, Orphic mysteries, and Egyptian initiations. The text blends prophetic tones with alchemical wisdom, addressing the soul as a living entity, not a metaphor. Jung's illustrations, labyrinths, winged creatures, solar crosses, draw from humanity's collective imagery, embodying archetypes that resonate across cultures and epochs. The Red Book was Jung's crucible, where he underwent a shamanic transformation. Its creation was a ritual of dissolution and rebirth. Mirroring the alchemical opus magnum, he wrote with blood, wept over pages, and painted visions that shook him to his core. Yet this was no private diary, it was a universal map of the psyche's depths. Jung knew its power and its peril. Fearing misunderstanding, he kept it locked away, unpublished in his lifetime. "This book freed me from all my neurosis," he confessed. Yet he doubted a rational world could grasp its truth. When published in 2009, the Red Book stunned scholars, mystics, and seekers. It was compared to Dante's Divine Comedy and the Bhagavad Gita. Yet its raw intimacy sets it apart. It offers no doctrine, only a path. For Jung, the book was a portal, not an endpoint, a gateway to the self. The integrated psyche uniting conscious and unconscious. It invites readers to confront their own souls, to hear the voices silenced by modernity. The Red Book is not to be understood but lived, a call to embrace the chaos and beauty of the human spirit. Within the enigmatic pages of the Red Book, Carl Jung crafted a singularly profound section, the 7 Sermons to the Dead. Written in 1916 and attributed not to himself but to Basilides, a 2nd-century Gnostic mystic. This cryptic text, blending poetry, metaphysics, and cosmology, stands as a pinnacle of Jung's spiritual vision. In it, he channels a voice that speaks of the pleroma, the divine fullness, abraxas, a deity uniting good and evil, and the dance of dualities transcending human understanding. The sermons are not rational discourse but a symbolic revelation, echoing ancient oracles and mystical traditions. The sermons emerged during Jung's deepest immersion in the unconscious, a period when he felt less an author and more an instrument of a greater force. Written in a prophetic tone, they address the dead, restless spirits seeking answers from Jung's home in Zurich. These spirits symbolize the unresolved fragments of the psyche, both personal and collective, yearning for integration. Through the sermons, Jung articulates a Gnostic worldview, where the divine is not a distant God but an inner reality, accessible through the soul's journey. The concept of Abraxas, a paradoxical figure embodying creation and destruction, challenges binary notions of morality, urging a synthesis of opposites. Jung's engagement with Gnosticism, alchemy, and Eastern philosophies informed the sermons. He saw parallels between their esoteric language and the archetypes he encountered. The pleroma, a realm of infinite potential, mirrors the collective unconscious, while Abraxas reflects the self, the psyche's unifying center. The sermons are a call to individuation, urging the reader to transcend ego-driven illusions and embrace the soul's complexity. Their dense, symbolic style demands not intellectual analysis but experiential immersion, akin to a sacred rite. Though brief, the sermons are a cornerstone of the Red Book, revealing Jung's role as a bridge between ancient wisdom and modern psychology. They underscore his belief that the soul speaks in symbols, not formulas. For readers, the sermons are a challenge to listen to the unconscious, to wrestle with paradox, and to seek the divine within. In this text, Jung becomes a modern mystic, offering not answers but a vision of the soul's eternal quest. The Red Book is Carl Jung's enduring legacy, a beacon for those who dare to explore the soul's uncharted depths. Unpublished until 2009, it emerged as a revelation, captivating psychologists, artists, mystics, and seekers worldwide. Compared to the Zohar or Plato's dialogues, its visceral intimacy sets it apart, not a doctrine but a mirror reflecting the reader's own inner wilderness. Jung's journey through crisis, active imagination, Philemon, the shadow, and the 7 sermons forged a new path, blending science and mysticism into a psychology of the soul. Jung's insights from the Red Book shaped his later work, giving rise to concepts like the collective unconscious, archetypes, individuation, and synchronicity. His study of alchemy, Gnosticism, and Eastern traditions, woven into the book's fabric, revealed the psyche as a living cosmos, not a problem to be solved. He showed that true wisdom is not conquered but suffered, born from the courage to face chaos and embrace contradiction. The pearl is born in the sludge, he wrote, a testament to the soul's transformative power. For modern readers, the Red Book is an invitation to awaken. It challenges the superficiality of a world obsessed with external answers, urging us to listen to the soul's quiet voice. Jung's encounter with Philemon reminds us that the greatest guide lies within, while his dialogue with the shadow teaches that wholeness demands both light and dark. The book's mandalas and cryptic sermons are not relics but living symbols, stirring something ancient in those who engage them. It resonates because it speaks to the universal human quest for meaning. Jung's message is clear: the soul exists, and it demands our attention. The Red Book offers no salvation, only a journey, a map for navigating the psyche's forests, temples, and abysses. Its impact lies in its honesty, showing that one can plunge into the unconscious and return with fire in their eyes. For those who hear its call, it is a reminder that the soul never stops speaking, even when the world demands silence. Jung's odyssey is not his alone, it is ours. Close your eyes, listen, and begin.